It was one of those crowded mornings on the city bus, people rushing to get to work, school, or just trying to make it through another day. The air was thick with tired sighs, the hum of traffic outside, and the occasional squeal of the brakes as the bus pulled over to pick up more passengers. Among the crowd was a 17-year-old black teen named Marcus. He was quiet, head down, headphones in, lost in a world of his own music and thoughts. Life hadn't been easy for him. He was raised by his grandmother in a small, worn-out apartment on the west side of town. Every day was a grind, but Marcus didn't complain. He had dreams, big ones. He wanted to go to college, maybe study computer science, and eventually change things. Not just for himself, but for his family and community. On this particular day, Marcus had gotten lucky and found a seat near the back of the bus. But just a few stops later, a visibly pregnant woman stepped onto the bus. She looked tired and a bit lost, holding her purse close and scanning the bus for a place to sit. Most people looked away, pretending not to notice. Some were glued to their phones. Others were too caught up in their own exhaustion. But Marcus saw her. Without saying a word, he stood up and motioned for her to take his seat. The woman looked surprised, maybe even a little hesitant at first. But then she smiled, a soft, grateful smile, and sat down. She thanked him, and he just nodded, brushing it off like it was nothing. But what Marcus didn't know was that this small act of kindness would be the moment that changed everything. As the ride went on, the woman kept glancing over at him. She seemed to study him, not in a judgmental way, but almost like she was trying to figure something out. When the bus reached her stop, she stood up slowly and turned back to Marcus. She reached into her bag, pulled out a small folded note, and handed it to him without saying a word. Then she stepped off the bus and disappeared into the crowd. Marcus stared at the note in his hand. It was just a piece of paper, nothing fancy, but something about it felt important. His curiosity was burning. He thought about opening it right away, but something told him to wait. The rest of the bus ride felt longer than usual, and all he could think about was what could be written inside. A thank you? A blessing? Maybe a phone number? When he finally stepped off the bus and unfolded the note, what he read stopped him in his tracks. But before we get to that, let's rewind just a little. Because what Marcus didn't know, and couldn't have known, is that the woman he gave his seat to wasn't just any pregnant lady on a bus. Her name was Victoria Caldwell, and she came from one of the wealthiest families in the country. Her father, Richard Caldwell, was a billionaire businessman, famous for his real estate empire, and infamous for his public views that many considered racially insensitive at best. His face had been on magazine covers, his words all over social media, stirring controversy time and again. People called him ruthless, cold-hearted, and out of touch with reality. And Marcus? He was everything Richard would have never expected to cross paths with, let alone help his only daughter. Victoria had been riding that bus that morning for a reason. She had walked out of her father's mansion, determined to escape the bubble she had grown up in. She didn't want drivers or security or any of the money that had built the walls around her life. She wanted real people, real moments, something that reminded her of the world outside her father's gated empire. That's how she ended up on that bus, tired and overwhelmed, but desperate to feel human again. And that's where she met Marcus. Back to the note. As Marcus stood on the sidewalk reading the message over and over again, his heart started to race. It wasn't just a thank you note. It was an invitation, an address, a phone number, and one line that shook him to his core. You changed the way I see the world today. Please let me do something for you in return. Call me. At first, Marcus thought it had to be a prank. Who leaves a message like that for a stranger on a bus? And why him? But something about the way she looked at him, the honesty in her eyes, it didn't feel fake. Still, Marcus wasn't the kind of guy who got mixed up in anything crazy. He had school, a part-time job, and responsibilities at home. He didn't have time for mysteries. but he couldn't ignore the feeling in his gut. Like, this moment was bigger than it seemed. He tucked the note into his pocket and walked home with 1,000 thoughts running through his mind. He didn't tell his grandmother. Not yet. She already had enough to worry about, and he didn't want to bring false hope into their home. But later that night, sitting at the small kitchen table with nothing but a flickering light bulb and a pile of homework in front of him, Marcus finally pulled out his phone. He dialed the number. It rang once, twice, 3 times, and then someone picked up. Hello? The voice on the other end was soft, familiar. Hi, this is Marcus. From the bus. There was a pause, then a breath. I'm so glad you called. What happened next was nothing short of unbelievable. And it all started with one simple act of kindness, one seat, one note, and one decision that would throw Marcus into a world he never imagined being part of. But just as things seemed to be heading in a hopeful direction, Marcus found himself standing face to face with the last person he expected to meet, Richard Caldwell himself. And let's just say, the first impression didn't go well. Because what the billionaire didn't know was that the boy standing in front of him, the boy his daughter was now speaking so highly of, was about to change his life in ways he never saw coming. And not everyone was ready for what that meant. Stick around because the real story is just beginning. Marcus could feel his heart thudding in his chest as he clutched the phone tighter. There was something in Victoria's voice. Warmth, maybe. Even relief, like she had been hoping he'd call. But he still didn't understand why. What did she mean when she said he changed the way she saw the world? He'd just stood up and offered his seat. That's what he'd been taught to do. Respect people, especially those in need. It didn't seem like a big deal to him. But maybe, to her, it was. Victoria asked if they could meet again, said she wanted to talk in person. Her tone was polite, but there was something else in it. Urgency, like time mattered. Marcus hesitated. He didn't know her, not really, and her world, from what little she told him on the phone, sounded like something out of a movie. Wealth, private schools, long hallways in giant houses, people who wore suits just to eat breakfast. He wasn't sure he belonged anywhere near that, but he agreed. They met a few days later at a small cafe on the east side of town, neutral ground. She came alone, no fancy car or bodyguards this time, just her in a hoodie and jeans, trying hard, not to stand out. But even dressed down, she had an energy about her, like someone who'd always lived above the clouds and was now learning to breathe real air. Marcus walked in and spotted her right away. She smiled when she saw him and waved him over. They talked for almost 2 hours. Victoria opened up quickly, almost like she'd been waiting to spill her thoughts. She told Marcus about her father, Richard Caldwell, the empire he built, the way he ruled his world like a king. She admitted that growing up she didn't question much. Life was comfortable. Everything was handed to her. But something changed recently. She said it felt like the walls around her were starting to close in, and she couldn't breathe in her own home anymore. Her father's views, the way he spoke about people, especially those who didn't look like him, it had always bothered her. But now, as she prepared to raise her own child, it scared her. She didn't want her baby to grow up in that same bubble. Marcus listened, trying to wrap his head around it all. This woman, who probably had enough money to buy his whole apartment building, was sitting across from him, opening her heart, searching for something real. It was strange, unexpected, but he couldn't help but respect her honesty. Then she told him something that made him sit up straight. My father, he knows about you, she said, carefully watching his face. When I told him about what happened on the bus, about the boy who gave up his seat for me, he didn't believe me at first, thought I was making it up. Said people like you aren't usually that thoughtful. Marcus blinked. People like me. She looked down, embarrassed. I'm sorry, I don't agree with him. That's why I wanted to find you. I needed him to see you're real. That kindness doesn't have a color or a background. I wanted him to see what I saw. Marcus let out a slow breath. He didn't know whether to be insulted, confused, or curious. Maybe all three. Then she added, "He wants to meet you." That's when the real weight of it hit Marcus. This wasn't just a random thank you gesture. Victoria had told her billionaire father about him, a man who, by the sound of it, didn't think much of people who came from neighborhoods like Marcus's. And now this man wanted a meeting? Why? Marcus asked. Victoria hesitated. I think he wants to prove me wrong. Or maybe prove himself right. But I also think part of him is just curious. You shook something in him. Marcus didn't say anything for a long time. He wasn't sure what any of this meant, but he knew one thing. Nothing about this situation was normal. And something told him that agreeing to meet Richard Caldwell would only pull him deeper into a world filled with sharp edges and hidden motives. That night, Marcus lay awake in his bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, trying to make sense of it all. His grandma was asleep in the next room, and the hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the house. He thought about how fast things had changed. One moment he was just a teenager trying to make it through the day. Now, he was being pulled into the orbit of one of the richest, most powerful men in the country. And for what? Because he stood up on a bus? He thought back to the look in Victoria's eyes, the mix of hope and fear. Whatever was going on in her life, it was big. And somehow, he was now part of it. The next day, Victoria called again and gave him the details. The meeting was set. It wouldn't be in some public space, but at the Caldwell estate, a massive property on the edge of town, gated, guarded, and wrapped in silence. The kind of place you see on magazine covers or reality TV shows. Marcus almost said no. Everything about it felt off. But his curiosity got the better of him. He had to know why. When he arrived at the estate, the gates opened slowly, like something out of a movie. A man in a suit led him through the driveway to the front door. The house was enormous. Marble floors, long hallways, walls covered in artwork that probably cost more than anything Marcus had ever seen. He kept his head up, but inside he felt small. Then he met him. Richard Caldwell stood in the center of a large office, back turned, looking out the window. When he turned around, his face was hard to read. Expression calm, eyes sharp, posture stiff. He didn't smile. He didn't even offer a handshake. "So you're the young man my daughter keeps talking about," he said. Marcus nodded. "Yes, sir." Richard narrowed his eyes slightly. "Tell me something, Marcus. Why did you give up your seat?" Marcus blinked. "Because she needed it, that's all." Richard studied him like he didn't believe it could be that simple. Like he was waiting for Marcus to ask for something in return. But Marcus didn't. After a long pause, Richard said, "The world doesn't reward kindness. It rewards power, strength, control." Marcus held his ground. "Maybe, but sometimes it just takes one kind act to change how someone sees things." There was silence, long and tense. Richard didn't respond. Instead, he walked over to a cabinet and pulled out a thick folder. He placed it on the table in front of Marcus. "What's this?" Marcus asked, confused. "An offer," Richard said. "Something that could change your future. But before I hand it over, I need to know who you really are." Marcus stared at the folder, but didn't reach for it, because deep down he knew. Whatever was inside that folder, money, opportunity, maybe even a trap, was just the beginning. And behind Richard's calm voice and cold stare, there was something more. Something dangerous. Marcus was in deeper than he realized, and there was no turning back now. Marcus didn't reach for the folder right away. He sat there, quietly staring at it, while the air in the room thickened. Richard Caldwell leaned back, slightly, crossing his arms like he was sizing Marcus up, waiting to see what move he would make. The billionaire's office was silent, except for the quiet ticking of an old clock on the wall. Marcus felt the weight of it all pressing down on his shoulders, like this moment wasn't just about a document or some meeting. It was about something bigger. He knew it, and Richard knew he knew it. "What's in there?" Marcus finally asked. "Opportunity," Richard said flatly. "A scholarship, a mentorship, access to resources most people like you never get close to. You'd be set." Up for life. Marcus narrowed his eyes slightly at the last part. People like me? Richard didn't blink. You know what I mean. I know exactly what you mean, Marcus said, his voice calm but steady. And I'm wondering why you'd offer all that to someone you didn't think twice about before. Your daughter mentioned me. There was a flicker of something in Richard's eyes. Maybe surprise, maybe respect. But it passed quickly. He shifted in his seat, tapping one finger against the desk. I don't believe in handouts, he said. But I do believe in influence, in reshaping narratives. I'm not offering this because I like you. I'm offering this because you're useful to a larger conversation I'm trying to control. Marcus sat back, letting those words settle. The honesty stung more than a lie would have. He wasn't being seen as a young man with dreams or potential. He was being used as a symbol, a story Richard could spin to change his image, to silence his critics, to say, "Look, I'm not racist. I helped this boy." Marcus could feel it, deep in his gut. But he also saw something else. A chance. Not just for him, but maybe to push against that same narrative from the inside. Before he could say anything, the door opened and Victoria stepped in. She looked between the two men, sensing the tension instantly. Everything okay? She asked, her voice careful. Richard stood. We're just having a conversation. Marcus was about to make a decision. Victoria looked at Marcus, and for a second, it felt like time paused. Her eyes weren't asking him to say yes or no, they were asking if he was okay, if he felt safe, if he knew what he was walking into. Marcus gave a small nod, but it wasn't a confirmation. It was a signal. He understood what this was now. All of it. Later that night, Marcus walked home in silence. He hadn't taken the folder. Not yet. He told Richard he needed time to think about it, and Richard didn't push. But Marcus could feel the pressure building. It wasn't just about a scholarship anymore. It was about stepping into a world that had never made room for someone like, unless they could use him. Back at home, his grandma noticed something was different. She watched him closely as he picked at his dinner, eyes distant. You okay, baby? She asked, setting her fork down. Marcus nodded, but it wasn't convincing. Just thinking. About what? He paused. About people. About power. About what it costs to take something when you know it's not being given freely. His grandma didn't ask more. She just reached over and gently touched his hand. You've always had a good heart. Don't let anyone make you feel like that's a weakness. The next day, things got more complicated. Marcus showed up at school like usual, but whispers followed him through the halls. Students looked at him differently. Teachers paused when calling on him. Something had shifted, and it didn't take long for Marcus to find out why. A story had gone out online. Billionaire's daughter inspired by humble act of kindness from local teen. There were photos. One of Marcus stepping off the bus, another of him entering the Caldwell estate. His name was out there now. So was Victoria's. The article painted it as a feel-good story. Rich girl learns compassion from black teen. Father gets involved. Scholarship offered. A classic redemption arc. But it didn't feel right. Marcus hadn't agreed to go public. He hadn't signed anything. No one had asked for his side. And now the world had a version of the story that didn't belong to him. He was being used as a symbol, just like he feared. At lunch, his best friend Jalen slid into the seat across from him holding his phone. You seen this, bro? He asked, showing Marcus the article. Yeah. You talked to them about this before it dropped? Marcus shook his head. Nope. Jalen leaned back. Man, I don't like it. This don't feel like they're trying to help you. Feels like they're trying to own you. Marcus stayed quiet, staring down at his tray. The food was cold. He couldn't eat. He spent the rest of the day in a fog, messages flooding his phone. Some supportive, some skeptical. Strangers saying how proud they were of him. Others accusing him of selling out. Even worse, there were some who twisted the story, turning it into something ugly. That night, Victoria called again. She sounded upset too. I didn't know they were going to release anything yet, she said quickly. I didn't approve it. I told them we needed more time. I'm so sorry, Marcus. Your dad did it? She sighed. Yeah, probably his PR team. They move fast when they think there's a story to control. Marcus felt the anger rising in his chest. He's not interested in helping, he's just trying to clean up his image. Victoria was quiet. I know. There was a long pause before Marcus spoke again. Then why bring me into this? Because I thought maybe you could change something from inside. Maybe if he saw someone real, someone he couldn't ignore, he'd finally stop hiding behind his money and power. Marcus wanted to believe that. He really did. But trust wasn't something he gave easily. Not when so much of his life had been about proving himself just to be seen as equal. As the days passed, the tension only grew. Reporters began showing up near his school. He started getting messages from organizations, some wanting to offer him real scholarships, others trying to turn his story into a platform for their own agendas. It felt like everyone wanted something from him. Except no one asked what he wanted, and through it all, he still hadn't opened that folder. One night, as he stood on his building's rooftop, looking out over the city lights, Marcus pulled it from his backpack. He set it on the concrete ledge. A gust of wind almost blew it away, but he caught it in time. Inside was everything Richard had promised. Full college funding, mentorship offers, job placement assistance. It was real. But it also came with strings, contracts, appearances. A commitment to represent the Caldwell brand in exchange for the gift. Marcus felt the weight of it all pressing against his chest. What would happen if he said no? What would happen if he said yes? What if, either way, he was being pulled into something far more dangerous than he realized? Because what Marcus didn't know yet, what no one had told him, was that Richard Caldwell wasn't just trying to protect his image, he was trying to cover up something much darker. And Marcus, without knowing it, had just stepped into the center of it all.